Good afternoon, Tea Party members and patriots. I am actually quite surprised to find anybody here. I was under the impression that the Tea Party movement is dead. Are you dead? I didn't hear that. Are you dead? When I told my daughter that I was coming to a tea party, she wanted to come. She's 5. You can understand what she thought it was. That's not what we are. You know, it seems to me that the mainstream media was wrong about us being dead, huh? What do you think? But how could that be? The mainstream media is never wrong. They never take the truth and twist it and change things and edit things out, do they? I didn't think so. Well, you know, the mainstream media thinks we're here because we're mean-spirited and intolerant. Is that true? So let me ask you a few questions here. Are we here? By the way, this is the interactive portion of the talk. I expect you guys to respond to me. Are we here because we think that the poor should suffer and starve to death, or do we think there's a better way?
Better way.
Are we here because we're racist and think all Americans should be white, or do we think an American is defined not by his color, but by his creed and his patriotism?
Yeah.
And we think that if you want to enjoy the benefits of being an American, you ought to obey and love our laws and our Constitution. Yeah. Amen. We think there's a better way. Are we here because we're closed-minded bigots, or is it because we've looked at 80 years of handouts and trillions of dollars spent on the war on poverty, and we've seen that only poverty and dependency has only increased, and we think there's a better way? Are we here because we have some romantic ideals about the Constitution and don't want people to reinterpret it or bring it up to date? Or is it that we think that the Constitution is a perpetual contract, and how dare they change our contract without the approval of all parties? This is a contract, and you don't change it on us unless you go through the approval process, and that, by the way, is called an amendment. Ever hear about it? So in the few minutes I plan to speak, I'd like to humbly offer you some tools to help others understand what the Tea Party and liberty is all about. I want to give you a key tool to help liberals understand how they should vote this November. First, let me ask you a few questions. Does the government give us our rights?
No.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Does the government give us our rights? No. Who gives us our rights? The Creator, amen. Now, if the government doesn't give us our rights and the Creator gives us our rights, what's the purpose of government? To protect our rights, exactly, to protect the rights we already have. But here's the question. What is a right? One of the impetuses for founding of these thousands of great tea parties all over this great and wonderful land was Obamacare. The liberals and the socialists argued that health care was a right. Is health care a right? No. But why not? And if that's not a right, what are rights? And how do I tell the difference? Now remember the Occupy Wall Street gang, and I do mean gang?
Yes.
On their list of demands, they had a list of rights. It includes the right to a house, the right to a well-paying job, the right to free college education, and the right to health care, of course. In fact, people argued that Obamacare would cost too much and not work, and they are right, because the CBO said it was going to cost $500 billion more than they said it would, and it would run a deficit, and it would leave 14 million people uninsured. Now what's really funny about that is currently if you take away all the people who could buy insurance and don't, what you're left is 14 million people who can't buy insurance. So it seems kind of ironic, but here's the deal. What if Obamacare did work? What if it didn't cost too much? Would that justify it?
No.
And I'm here to show you why it does not justify it. It won't justify it because healthcare is not a right. What is healthcare? It's a good. Now don't get confused between rights and goods. Many people confuse rights with goods. It's critical to differentiate the two. Here's an easy way to look at it. A right comes from God, like the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to freedom, the right to freedom of speech, the right to freedom of assembly, justice. These things come from God. But if something depends on somebody else's service, work, or money, it's not a right, it's a good. It's a good. Goods are the product of someone's labor. You see, while you may have the right not to be prevented from an education, you are not entitled to that education. See the difference? Why? Because that education will be dependent on somebody else providing the labor to provide you with that education. Same for food. Somebody had to grow the food, somebody had to harvest it, somebody had to clean it, and as soon as something is the product of somebody else's work, is it a right?
No.
It is a what?
Good.
A good. You always have the right to your own goods. But if somebody takes the product of your labor, your goods, and gives it to somebody else, what is that called?
Theft.
Stealing and slavery, exactly. So goods are what you're promising to someone, however noble those goods are, like healthcare or a home. Eventually you'll have to enslave some men to guarantee those goods to other men. Our founders were not idiots. They knew the difference between the two. You will never see a single good called a right in our Constitution or in the Declaration of Independence. So just so we are clear, rights come from where?
God.
And goods are the product of man's what?
Labor.
Okay, let me ask you this. There are some constitutions out there that do give you rights, goods, as though they were rights. What kind of constitutions are they? Communist constitutions, socialist constitutions, and you've seen that they either don't work, they end up in tyranny, or they go bankrupt. Why? Because goods that are granted as rights require some men to be forced to provide those goods to others, and that results in a totalitarian state, or a bankrupt state. Or both. In short, confuse goods with rights and you slave some men all the time, or all men some of the time. And what do you think we have today in America? So what happens when government starts giving you things that aren't rights and calling them rights? Well, they do start taking real rights away from you. This is not something we can fall asleep on. So if people tell you that you're mean-spirited because you don't want to give health care to the poor, you should tell them that health care is not for the state to give you. Health care and charity should come from the church. I was on a radio show recently and a caller called in and she said, "You are mean-spirited, you're evil because you don't want anybody to have health care." I said, I grew up, by the way, I was born in Ghana, Africa. Until recently I thought I could not run for president. I thought we'd have to annex Ghana for that to happen. But anyway, so I told this lady, I said, well, what are you saying that I'm mean-spirited? I said, the churches can take care of the poor. They can provide health care. She said, you're crazy, this is 2012. I said, what does that got to do with anything? I said, let me ask you a question. Then she said, oh, but look at my hospital. They've got the latest equipment, they've got all this stuff. I said, well, let me ask you a question. What is the name of your hospital? She said, St. Jude's. But that doesn't matter, she said. I said, where do you think it started? Who founded it? I said, I grew up in Africa, and the best hospitals out there were what hospitals? Not the government-run hospitals, but the what? The missionary hospitals. We can do it again. So let me... Oh, by the way, if anyone says that Jesus says the government should feed the poor because Jesus said that, you tell them, well, Jesus also said, go into all the world and preach the gospel. And the day you start telling the government to do that, then I may agree with the government feeding the poor too. So let me dispense with some liberal lies.
We have time?
If someone says to you that you shouldn't force your morality on them, you ask them this. Wait, I have a question. That thing you just said, that you shouldn't force your morality on other people? Yeah, is that your moral value? Then why are you forcing it on me? If someone says you can't legislate morality, here's what I say. I say, oh, we can't? Oh, can you give me an example of a law that's not based on a moral value? And they get stuck. I say, oh, I know. How about the law on stealing? Well, no, that's a moral value.
Yeah.
How about the law against killing? Oh, no, that's a moral value. All laws are based on moral values. The question is, whose moral values do you want legislated? Yours, mine, Hitler's, or Mother Teresa's? You know, the Founding Fathers said none of them. The Founding Fathers said in the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, we should legislate the moral values of what? The laws of nature and of nature's God. So let me close here. I want to close by noting that while the Tea Parties welcome folks of all creeds and religions, let me speak for a minute here to the Christians in the crowd. Brothers and sisters, Did you know that there were over 60 million conservative Protestants? I'm just talking about Protestants in America. These folks generally agree with our Tea Party principles. Why is this important? Well, in 2008, Obama won with less than 9 million votes. And with less than 9 million votes winning, 40 million conservative Christians did not vote. Why is this of interest to Tea Partiers? Because even if you're not religious, if we can motivate those churches, we don't need to talk to the liberals, we don't need to convince the independents, we don't need to convince the undeclared, we just need to get those Christians that are sitting in the pews today to get out and vote for godly values. The problem is the Christians have been brainwashed. They're afraid to get involved in politics. So let me do a little bit of self-promotion here if you'll permit me. Caution, self-promotion coming out. This uninvolvement by Christians frustrated me to no end. So we produced a book with the American Family Association that teaches you how to convince your friends and pastors why they and the church should get involved in politics. We answer every single objection that your church members or a pastor could ever think of. It's in that, there's a tall, bright orange booth back there with the Constitution on the back of it. Come by our booth and find out more. If you need a speaker about things like this, I will be happy to speak to your church, your small group, whatever. Invite me to come and I will come. Let's spread this message, because you know what, folks? If we don't spread this message, we won't be saying God bless America. We'll be saying God save America. And that's dangerous. End of self-promotion. Let me close. By the way, how many of you are sick of government overextending in this? Like the plastic bag ban. Are you sick of that? Well, I'm sick of that. Frankly, I don't shop in San Jose anymore. I go to Campbell. Thank God for Campbell. Well, if you hate that, come to our booth, because we're taking up email sign-up list so we can get this on the ballot. So come back to our booth and let's fill it up. Okay? Let me close. On Friday, I learned that Obama has now authorized the Department of Homeland Security to enforce green laws. Who will protect us from the protectors? In 2008, the rallying cry of the socialist and economic justice unionists was hope and change. Back in 2012, back then we came up, the Tea Party came up with the original Tea Party motto, and that is, revolution is brewing. So no more change, Mr. Obama. It's time for that Tea Party revolution again. We must stand. We may be disappointed, but we must not be discouraged. We may be frightened, but we must not fear. We may hesitate, but we must not cease. We may stumble, but we must not fall. We may falter, but we must not fail. In all this, we must persevere. God bless you, and God